Hi, this is Mike Ruane of Revelation Software, and today I'd like to talk to you about OpenInsight version 9.2's SQL connector technology. The idea behind the SQL connector technology is that we'd be able to use a development tool like OpenInsight to work with native SQL data as if it was the same data that OpenInsight developers have been working with for years. So first, to show you that we have a SQL server running, we will double click on the SQL server here and fire it up. You'll see that we're working against MTR laptop-T500/SQL Express, so the current machine that I'm working on, and the authentication is Windows authentication. I'll click on connect, and hopefully the SQL server will fire up. If we go through databases and we go down, we'll see a database named pubs. Many versions of SQL Server had a pubs database as a sample, and we brought that sample forward and we're using it inside of SQL 2008. I'll expand the list here to look at the tables, and we'll see that we have DBO authors. If I go and I run a new query, we're going against pubs. I'll say select star from authors, and I'll press Control E to execute that, and you'll see a series of results. So we have a whole bunch of data here from SQL. That's all you want to see right now, that we have a database, that we connected to it. Database is named pubs, and we have a table in there called authors, and these are the columns inside that application. So we'll go back to OpenInsight, and we'll close down this little message here, and we'll go into the database manager, and underneath utilities and SQL tables we have two choices: the SQL connection wizard and the SQL dataset wizard. The connection is where we decide the server that we're going to work with, the database on that server that we're going to work with, and information like usernames, passwords, and so on. The dataset is when we choose the tables that we're going to work with and the columns from within the tables and how we're going to work with those particular columns. So we'll start off with the connection wizard, and we'll click on next, and I'll call this one example 1 because we have to give it a name. Now we're going to be prompted for the shadow dictionary location. The idea behind a shadow dictionary is that we don't want to affect the original SQL column definitions whatsoever. So what OpenInsight will do is that when we decide the tables that we will connect to, that we will interrogate those tables, determine the column layouts, and we'll make a local version of them so we can modify them as needed. This is the default directory where the shadow dictionaries will be created, and I'm very happy with the choice of example1_shadow. So we click on the next button. Now we're asked how we're going to connect to the data source. Now this can probably be provided to you from the DBA of this particular SQL server that you're going against. I'm going to click on the options button here, and it will prompt me with a data link properties window. Because I'm going to SQL Server, I'm going to choose the Microsoft Ole DB provider for SQL Server and click on the next button. I'm going to enter the name of the server that I'm working with, which was MTR laptop, MTR laptop-T500/SQL Express. I'm going to use the Windows integrated NT authentication. I'll click on the drop down for the databases, and I see pubs is there. I'll click on test connection, and the test connection succeeded. I'm happy with that. I'll click on OK, and click on OK, and it looks like a Windows 7 display issue, but we see that we have our connection string is set up. We have to choose the SQL provider that we're going to work with because there are slight variations in the different flavors of SQL. So we're going to use MS SQL here. And the database catalog is which one we're working with on the server, and we're still going to work with pubs. And we're going to use the integrated authentication settings like we did when we did our first connection. So we'll just use our Windows credentials, and finally we'll say let's connect to this data source. So we've done step 1. We have now defined the connection. Now we're going to define the data set using that connection. So we'll go to utilities, SQL tables, and now we'll go to the SQL dataset wizard. The first thing we're going to be prompted for is where the data lives, and we'll call it example 1. That's the one that we chose. We're going to select the table within that data set, and you'll see that we have a list of all the tables that we saw when we were in SQL Server. I'll choose authors here, so I've selected the table that we're going to use for this data set. Now that we've selected the table, I need to select which columns I'm going to work with. I'm going to do that by using a script. I can either enter in the script manually, as in select column, column, column from table, or I can just choose create script, and it'll create a default script for me using all of the columns that are defined in the database. I'll go to test the script, and the fact that data comes back means that the connection and my script has worked. I'll click on next, and here I'm prompted to choose a primary key. While SQL Server does not require the use of a primary key in a table, OpenInsight does. What we've done here is that the system has interrogated the system, determined which columns are the primary keys, and offered them to us in a list highlighted. Now, it's chosen the author ID. I'm pretty happy in this case. We'll click on Next. And finally, we have to choose the name of this table, authors underscore SQL. I'll say attach this data set now. I'll go on Next. Now I can either say Finish, and that I've defined all the data sets that I want to define for this connection, or I can choose Save Anew. But I'm happy with this one. We'll click on Finish. And the fact now that we'll see that our display has changed, that in our database manager we have SQL dataset tables, and we have a volume called example1, and within that volume we have one table defined called authors underscore SQL. So at this point we've made a connection to the SQL database, and all of the OpenInsight tools can work with this data as if it was native OpenInsight data. For example, if we go into the form designer, if I choose File, create a new form, OpenInsight tables, there's authors underscore SQL, the name of our data set, and I'll choose author ID, L name, F name, I'll choose address, city, state, zip, and then I'll choose phone. I'll click on OK, and we'll see that we have a quick form was created for us. I'll give this a test run, and I will call it example 1 again, even though I'm going to replace an existing one. So I'll go to QBF, which is query by form. I'll initialize it, and what I'll say is give me everything whose ID is greater than null. So go to QBF and go into execute, and there we go. We have 23 records selected. So I know that my keys for next and previous are F3 and F4. I go to next, and I'll press F3 again. You'll see that the records are changing. I go to QBF and I go into table mode. You can see that I have all the data there, and as I scroll down, the data in the data entry form changes. So if I was to take, let's go back to Cheryl Carson, who lives in Berkeley, California. If I was to cancel out of here and change her from Berkeley, California, from Berkeley to Berkeley, New Jersey, I press Control S to save it, File and Save, and I go back to the SQL Server. I press Control E to execute my query again. We'll see that Cheryl Carson now lives in Berkeley, New Jersey. So I go back to the form designer. I change her to Berkeley, New Jersey to Berkeley, Tennessee. I press Control S to save it. Go back to here, press Control E to execute it, and we'll see the data actually changes. So the screen is actually talking real time to the SQL database. There's no batch importing, no batch exporting. So modifying the data with a form, cancel, I'll do that. Modifying the data with a form is fairly easy. If I wanted to do it with a program as well, I could just shut down the form designer, go into the system editor, application tools, system editor. I'll have to move this over a little bit here. I'll say create a new stored procedure. Under utilities, I'll choose a code template of the RTI full program, and I'll work with a table called authors SQL, and click on OK. It's built the program for us, and I'll call this example 1. Press F9 to compile it. It's going to be called example 1. Press F5 to get to TCL, and I'll say run example 1. Hold on a second, let's put a debug in there so we can see what's going on. I'll put a debug right here. F9 again, F5, and I'll say run example 1. And we'll see that we're in the debugger now. I'll just move this over a little bit, and if I sort of step through the program, we'll see these variables, and the system variable of @record will contain the data that we're working with here. And I'll just scroll down here, and there's @record. And just sort of walk through it again. We'll see that the contents of @record change every time we go through it. Now it's Hal's Bloch Reginald. We'll walk it again, reading @record. And we see the changes there. And in this program, as I just press F5 to let it run all the way through to the end, will complete successfully, so it also does reads and writes. So that, in a very fast nutshell, is how to use the OpenInsight SQL connector. It's found in the Database Manager, under Utilities, SQL Tables. You make a connection first, and then you make a dataset wizard. Then hopefully, once that works correctly, you'll be able to use all of the OpenInsight tools against the SQL data as if it was native OpenInsight data. Thanks very much. Have a good day.